Hello, and welcome to Health and Fitness Redefined. I'm your host, Anthony Amen. Join me today as we take a dive into the world of health and wellness, where we learn how to overcome adversity, depict fact versus fiction, and see health and fitness in a whole new light. Guys, I have an amazing guest for all of you today. I know in a lot of episodes, we've talked about what's a fat, what's a carb, what's a protein, but I don't think we've ever talked about how to cook healthy. So today's guest is a renowned chef. Let me tell you, this guy is awesome and knows his stuff. So I highly recommend you buckle your seatbelts in on this episode and get ready. And I'd like to introduce Chef Allen. Allen, welcome to the show, man. Pleasure to have you.
Hey, Anthony, great to be here.
I am so excited to have you on today. I'm really excited to pick your brain when it comes to cooking. I know a lot of people, at least in my field, they go and cook healthy and they just throw chicken on and then a little bit of rice and then some broccoli. And they're like, I ate chicken, broccoli, and rice for 7 straight days. And that gets really boring. And then they crave something more flavorful and they end up cheating. But I want to talk about all that stuff. But without further ado, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself as far as what made you become a chef in the first place?
Sure. So I'm based in Boston. I own and operate AC Kitchen, which is a meal delivery service that goes from Boston to New York. We're building out a much bigger project that will reach Miami and New York and have its own location in New York City as well. So as far as why did I become a chef? So high school, went to a trade school, chose culinary arts, not because I knew I wanted to be a chef, but because I loved food and I loved to eat. I was just sort of skinny, football player that wanted to eat more and, get bigger. Most like goals as most kids at that age. And so that's why I got into it. I also knew that I could get a job in the field. Started working really young in the business right around the same time as freshman year of high school. I started working in the food business. Still back then didn't know I wanted to be a chef, just knew that I could make some money, buy my own car, buy clothes that I wanted, that kind of thing. And that's where it started. And then I just slowly started to listen to the chefs around me and become inspired. It wasn't until my first year of college, directly after high school, I went to culinary school, that I started to feel the passion for the arts of food. Before that, like I said, it was more of a job. It was like a job that could pay my bills, and it was a lot of fun too. I had a lot of fun working in the business throughout high school. But yeah, like I said, it wasn't until, you take out those student loans, and I started working in Boston at that time, and then it became a lot more serious. I started to realize that I was going to be a chef, and this was my path.
I love it. So you started off, I guess, like most chefs do. I love food.
Yep.
I love that answer.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I totally get it. I think we had the same issue growing up where we were way too skinny, couldn't build muscle because we were too skinny, and just had to eat whatever was in front of our face.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you started working in a restaurant, right? And you said in high school?
I was actually in a grocery store first, stocking apples and taking the trash out. I was like 13. I started working at a fast casual place for the most part of high school. Then I'd, go on to like a 3-star hotel and then a 4-star hotel and, private country club. I sort of worked my way up until I got to Boston and worked at some of the best places in the city. But I bounced around quite a bit, I have to say. I'd have 2 or 3 jobs at the same time. It was a workhorse back then, and I'm glad I did because I learned so much.
Oh yeah, I can imagine kind of working your way up the chain of the different tiers of restaurants. And then what inspired you to go, and I know your company now is more of a meal company. What inspired that shift?
So didn't plan on becoming a private chef in Miami. Ended up getting a gig that brought me back to Boston. With Tom and Gisele. Obviously, that's a big part of my story. So as a private chef, I I started to see this demand that, people wanted prepared food in their fridge, ready to go. And what's out there is not, it's overly produced. It's not really chef curated. A lot of people that are developing these companies, they're not chefs. They're not even have ever worked in the food business. They're just sort of slapping it together, and it's sort of an insult to the industry because they're like I said, they're not chefs. And so I see not only is it what I want, I want this food in my fridge, but I see a big demand for it. A lot of the issues we have around dietary related disease are the options that we have at any given point. So if it's lunch or it's dinner for the family, you have working parents at home trying to feed themselves and their children. And a lot of times it's a last minute decision that ends up being not the healthiest. So, that's sort of what I've seen my whole life, and more so over the past, 5, 6, 7 years. And that's the demand I'm looking to fill.
I think that's a perfect place to start and really dive into stuff. Actually, is one point you mentioned was families now, the mother and father, at least around us, are working. Yeah. And then they have kids. So they're coming home like 5, 6 p.m. They're exhausted from a day's work. The last thing they want to do is go in the kitchen and cook for an hour and a half to quickly eat, clean up, and go to bed.
Right.
So they usually choose those unhealthier options, like something quick, either whether it's buying pre-made food or going out to eat, and they can't afford the fancier restaurants every day. So it's more or less just fast food or this. So in your experience, if somebody is kind of in that situation, they have kids, they're really pressed for times, what's some like quick options for them that they can do to eat better?
So, I mean, for me, and I know that some, some jobs are more demanding than others, right? So sometimes the parent will have, they're an entrepreneur, they're working 7 days a week. But if they have a 9 to 5 and they're working Monday through Friday, still have some time off, right? And for me, it's prioritizing the meal planning. So, and this is something that I obviously do, so I may be a bit biased because it's what I specialize in, but you've got to prioritize the meal planning the same way that you prioritize your retirement plan and your health insurance and, even your education. Like, you went to school to get an education so that you could provide for your family. Well, the meal planning is also providing for your family. And we can't leave that out. It's just as important, if not more important, than, like I said, the health insurance, the retirement plan, and the education. 3 things that we prioritize. They're at the top of the list for most families. Those things are must do in your life. And and the meal planning falls by the wayside because we're spoiled. We do have food options everywhere we go. We're not living in a desert. If we were, it would certainly be at the top of the list. So yeah, that's my thinking around it. We've got to make the meal planning a priority, as if we didn't have the luxury of just picking up the phone or going on an app to get food in the house. So yeah, it is just planning ahead.
I like that. The planning ahead on if you're busy Monday to Friday, you still Saturday and Sunday to prep out for the week. And I feel like most of the time with cooking, that's the hardest part, is getting the stuff together, making sure you have all the right ingredients, cutting the veggies, even some stuff you can cook and keep in the fridge for extended periods of time.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Making things in batches and freezing them and buying the right containers that you need. And it's, we have options. You can now have groceries delivered. You can buy vegetables that are pre-cut. Like, there's a lot of things you can do to make it more efficient. But also just becoming a chef of your own kitchen, because a lot of times people will have a palate for developed flavors, but they can't produce it on their own, and they just sort of throw in the towel and say, screw it, I'm gonna buy it instead. I really like the flavor of that pad thai, but I don't know how to get it to taste like that, so I'm just gonna buy it. And so anyway, that's where the fun part comes in. Like, learn to love the food that will love you back. That's one of the mottos that I embrace when I give talks and stuff like that. It's just diving in. We don't all have to become a chef, but we all, most of us, love food. We love flavor. So learn how to develop those flavors and dive into it and embrace it.
I'm sitting here laughing because I grew up in a very Italian household. So I know how to cook Italian food, but I have a palate for like Persian, Greek, Indian food. I have no idea how to do it.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean,
So
Italian's going to set you up because luckily Italian's like the most popular cuisine in the United States, but it's still, like you said, you like other flavor profiles. So how do you kind of learn to pick those things up? And luckily there's YouTube videos, there's, cookbooks, and there's all different ways to learn different recipes. So.
Awesome. I'm going to pick a couple different types of foods, and I really want you to get your opinion about what you think with them, what you can do with them, and kind of break it down that way. I think the first thing I want to start with is oils, because I think it's the most misunderstood cooking out there. And I want you to explain it, but I want to just ask an additional question for myself on top of there, which is, when cooking with certain oils, don't they change from unsaturated to saturated fats at certain temperatures? This is your field, not mine. So explain that to us a little bit.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about oils, I definitely have oils that I cook with and I have oils that I finish with, right? I love really good organic Greek olive oil. It's a great finisher. So it's in almost every vinaigrette that I do. It's got to be organic. And also I do appreciate the Greek olive oil. They tend to be at the top of the list when it comes to rating olive oils around the world. So for me, olive oil isn't the worst to cook with. It actually has a decent smoke point, but I don't cook with olive oil. I choose avocado oil or coconut oil. They're fully saturated. They're gonna hold up at a higher heat. What I stay away from is the seed oils. So seed oils, and especially like canola oil, isn't even a real, that isn't even a real oil. Canola is not a plant. It's a made up, genetically modified, plant that but actually in Canada, they've modified for human consumption this plant called rapeseed, which has a horrible name. They could never call it rapeseed oil. But that's what it is. And, you've got to just say it straight. And this plant was used mostly for mechanical reasons until they realized like it's really cheap to grow. We could mass produce this if we just slightly change it a little bit. So they genetically modify it. They call it canola, Canadian, C-A-N-ola oil. And here we are with this mass produced crap that's in everything because it's so cheap. It's constantly being used to fry things, and it's in all the processed food because it's really shelf stable, and it's just horrible. So the seed oils, the canola oil, not a fan of. They're inflammatory. They're not natural. And so I just stay away from those oils. And oil in general, to be honest, when we're talking about focusing on whole foods, what I feel is what nature gave us to eat, which are whole foods that are found in nature. That's what we should be focusing on. Oil isn't really part of that equation. Oil it's still processed, whether it's olive oil or, avocado or coconut. It's not a whole food. So although I do use oils, they should never be the focus. They should always be in moderation because they are not found in nature. It's a byproduct and it's processed. Even if it is a high quality organic Greek olive oil, it's still not the whole olive. So yeah, that's something to look at too. If it's not a whole food, it shouldn't be the focus of any dish.
I first of all had no idea what canola oil was. So that information to me is brand new.
Oh, that's great.
And I love the point of eating whole foods because that's something we've talked about a lot when it comes to difference between fruits and juices, where fruits you get the fiber and stuff. And even if you just squeeze an orange, it's still processed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I absolutely love that. But oils, like it's when you're cooking and stuff, if let's say you want to go towards more of a healthier option, is there an alternative to cooking besides oils, or should you just stick to certain types? Like you said, avoid canola and seed.
So I actually
where to help with that?
I'll use water, to be honest. So in my business and even at home, and I've done a recipe recently with a local media outlet, we used water. And when you have, like, let's say aromatics like onion, carrot, celery, if you were to saute them in water, their sugars would naturally develop and they would naturally caramelize. So the end result is still this caramelized aromatic that will flavor your soup, whatever it might be. You don't need the oil to bring out the flavor and ultimately the sugars in those vegetables. Obviously, when you're searing a piece, let's say you're searing a scallop or like a piece of meat, right? You're not going to be able to do that with oil. You need the fat to help get that sear that you're looking for, that hard sear, especially on like a scallop, for example. But with most vegetables, just think about what you're trying to do. You're trying to just bring out the natural sugars so that it will bring flavor to a dish. And you don't need oil to do that with vegetables that have sugar in them. So yeah, water, as simple as it is, and it's obviously much less expensive, and it's going to produce pretty much the same result. The method is a little bit different. You've got to watch it. You've got to stir it. You've got to, add the right amount of water to get it to the caramelization that you want. But ultimately, you'll end up with the same result just using water.
Wow, I didn't know that at all. Water, you want to talk about saving money and how eating healthy isn't cheap. There you go, using water. That's the cheapest commodity we have.
Yeah, try it. Do some carrot, onion, celery, the mirepoix that we use in a lot of soups and dishes. That will caramelize up and bring the same flavor as if you had, a few tablespoons of oil in there. Mm-hmm.
We just started, and I feel like I've learned so much information, and my cooking has changed forever officially.
That's great.
So let's talk about the proteins. So different types of meats we can cook with. I know in American diet, it's all about the beef. Everything is beef, pushing beef. I want you to get your opinion on beef, different types of proteins we can cook with, and kind of sticking towards that healthier option.
So, when I first started to develop this philosophy way back in 2010, 2011, I started to really focus on plants. And I felt as though eating a more plant-based diet, which never meant vegan, eating a more plant-based diet was not only better for human health, but also better for the planet. And that made a lot of sense to me. That's what really resonated with me. And that's what I've stuck with all the way through. And when it comes to protein, we got to think about amino acids and essential amino acids that the body doesn't make that we need to be consuming. And meat is a quick option because it's flesh, right? It's closest to what we are. And it has all of those amino acids that we need. But it's not the only thing. Plants are not like meat, where most of them don't have all of those amino acids, but some of them do. So quinoa, amaranth, millet, for example, some superfoods will carry all amino acids. Some of the bee pollen and things like that will have it. Spirulina, but we've got to look at so the first thing you said was protein, and then you immediately went to meat. So when I think of protein, I think of all of those things that have amino acids, all of those whole foods, right? And then I think from a chef standpoint, what's delicious and what people like and what's more approachable is most of the time meat. But going back to my philosophy that believes that a more plant-based diet, which flexitarian is technically the term, means that there won't be meat in every dish for many reasons. So, when it comes to meat, like beef, for example, beef is probably most consumed, and unfortunately a lot of that is most likely conventional meat, which is very unhealthy and not good for the body, causes inflammation, can be directly related to cancer growth. We've got to look at grass-fed meat. So grass-fed organic meat, beef is definitely the way to go, but in small quantities. Should not be eating grass-fed organic beef every day. Not only is it not good for health, but also it's not good for the planet. Grazing cows on grass, imagine we grazed every cow that we raised on grass, we wouldn't have any land. So that tells me that we need to consume less animal protein, just the right type of animal protein, and then focus on those other amino acid sources like plants, like I said, the whole grains and even the plants that don't have all 9 essential amino acids, when you combine them like rice and beans, for example, they now do. So a wide variety of plants will supplement those amino acids when you're not eating all of that animal protein.
I want to talk about two quick things that you mentioned in there. The first one was the cows and how they're not good for the planet. And I don't know if you know this, you probably do, but most of carbon emissions actually come from cows because the gas they excrete.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is really bad for the planet. When I say most, I mean, it's I don't want to give a number because people are like, you're wrong by a couple percentages, but it's high.
Yeah.
Very, very high.
And
then the other point, no, go for it. Sorry.
I was going to say, it's the ones that are, they're not raised in a humane way, right? They're slammed together in these massive barns side by side. They're not grazing. They're not living naturally. And it's those really dense population of cows in one place. Not only the manure and the runoff that comes from those cows, but then what it does to the atmosphere. Like, so it's bad for the ocean, bad for the atmosphere. It's like right there, both of those things. So every time you eat conventional meat, that's what you're contributing to, in my opinion.
I like that a lot. And the next point, which is kind of related, where you're talking about having different options as far as the essential and non-essential amino acids, is making sure that even if you're having some kind of veggie, there's always a partner veggie to it to help get that complete protein, because your body needs the complete protein to use it. So you mentioned rice and beans. Any other ones you know off the top of your head?
So most nuts combined with the grains, it's funny. Some will just be off by one. So it's most of the time the nut will have the missing amino acid that the grain doesn't have. But it's usually like right down the list. If you put, all the different beans, all the different grains, and all the different nuts, and you put them in rows, you can mix match across the board most of them things. It's just having a wide variety of whole grains, legumes, nut seeds. And also I want to point out, they've got to be prepared the right way. So you can't just, this is something, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too far because it's complex to some, but soaking and sprouting these grains and beans is very important to me. So, making them more easily digestible and making those nutrients more easily assimilated in the body. So if you just take, black beans off the shelf and cook them, most likely you're going to feel bloated, and most likely you haven't broken down that phytic acid, the anti-nutrients that is built into the plant to actually harm whatever eats it, right? So I'm not sure if you're familiar with any of this. Am I going way off the way off topic?
No. This is good because there's a lot of stuff like this exact thing that I don't know and a lot of people don't know. I want you to continue on this. It's very interesting.
So this is not something that's new. Certainly not something I made up. In fact, it's ancient, right? So way back when, our ancestors knew that they had to ferment and soak and sprout all of their grains and beans. They all did it back then. If you look back in cultures way back when, they all did this. They did it with wheat. They did it with grains. They did it with beans. They did it with oats. Sometimes it was a very long fermentation process before they ate it. They were more intuitive back then. They were living off the land. They listened to their bodies in a way that we don't listen to our bodies today. So when they ate something and it made them feel bloated, they didn't just deal with it. They went back to the source of that bloating and they figured it out. And what happened with processed food is that we skipped that step. So we just went right from, milling to making bread. We skipped that whole process. So when it comes to bread, sprouting and fermenting the grains to make the bread first, that's what makes it a lot more easily digestible, and will not produce the same inflammation that the bread does today. And the same with rice and beans. So plants, Mother Nature gave plants a fighting chance, just like Mother Nature gave an animal teeth and fangs and the ability to run. And so we look at a plant, we think it's an innocent, helpless thing that grows and it's just open game, right? We can just eat it if we want to because it's just there, it can't fight back. But if you look under the surface, those plants are built with mechanisms far more complex than any any animal or mammal that has a nervous system, right? So they have anti-nutrients built into them that they can basically turn off and turn on. It's really fascinating, actually. So plants, the anti-nutrients in plants are built so that mostly their seeds make the mammal bloated, especially mammals that only have one stomach, right? They don't have that second or third stomach the way that some animals do, right? Us humans, we don't have it. We don't have a stomach that ferments the grain before it gets digested. We just eat it and it gets digested, right? Some animals do. Some animals have a digestive system that holds on to the grains, lets them ferment inside their own body, and then digests them. Like, we don't have that luxury that some animals do. So what that tells me is that we need to ferment those grains and beans, or sprout, roast before we consume them, because if we don't, that's when we have the bloating. That's when it actually pulls nutrients through, from our body. It actually strips us of the nutrients that we need, because that's what it's doing to survive. The plant doesn't want us to live. It wants to live itself, right? And when it wants us to spread a seed, the seed will become indigestible, so that when we, poop out that seed down the road, we then, help that plant spread its seed. So the plants actually have, like I said, just as much of a fighting chance as any animal that has visible teeth and claws to fight and, produce offspring, if that makes any sense at all.
No, I'm thinking in my head, I think it's something like we only eat 10% of the plants out there that we can even only consume. The rest are toxic. So it's totally true what you're saying, is that the plants need some kind of mechanism to help them survive, and a lot of them do. I want to really make it, this might be so basic for you, but I think it's for myself and the listeners it will help. What is sprouting and fermenting? Like, how would you do that?
Yeah, so you can buy sprouted grains, sprouted beans. Any health store is going to have these things. They're super expensive because the process takes a long time, right? But you can buy, there's a pretty mainstream brand that you'll find at the major health stores, right, that have sprouted quinoa, sprouted rice, and that saves you that step, right? But you could just soak these. So grains would be soaked at room temperature with a little bit of apple cider vinegar. That helps make the water acidulated. That helps break down those lectins and phytic acid. Not completely, but a good part of it will be broken down. You could do it overnight. You could do it for 4 or 5 hours. And then when you cook it, not only does it cook a lot quicker, but now it's going to be a lot more easily digestible, and the nutrients will be more easily assimilated. And then with beans, like black beans and azuki beans and lentils, it would be boiling water on top. You would soak them overnight, a good amount of water because they will expand, with a little bit of apple cider vinegar, and then soak them for as long as 48 hours if you can. And then you cook them really well. They should be really, really tender by the time you eat them. There's other ways to throw in, like a piece of kombu, a little bit of, baking soda. These things are going to help break down those phytic acids. Put them in the pressure cooker if you'd like. But you've got to look at breaking down the grains and beans the same way that you broke down that animal. If that helps at all. Sort of looking at plants the same way. They got to be broken down.
Is this the same for rice? Because I know when you cook rice, you just measure it, you put water, make it boiling, measure amount of rice, and pour it in. Or should you pre-soak it before doing that process?
So white rice has already been stripped of that germ. So white rice doesn't actually have the phytic acid and lectin. It's been stripped away. What you have now, the downside of the white rice, is that it's a simple carb now, so it can cause that insulin spike. I'm not a big advocate, especially people that are prone to obesity or they're overweight, dealing with things like that. So white rice, if you're going to eat white rice, which you don't have to soak or sprout it, like I said, that's been removed. Little bit of coconut oil at the end will help with the resistant starch. When you eat it, it won't cause such a spike in insulin. But with the brown rice, yes, you've got to soak it the same way. A little bit of apple cider vinegar, room temperature water, overnight if you can, and that will help break it down.
That's so intriguing. I didn't know any of this. I knew about like phytonutrients. I knew about how foods with insulin responses, but no one ever teaches you that you need to soak it 24 to 48 hours later. You never learn that anywhere.
Yeah, it's because it's really, if you look into Ayurveda and Chinese medicine and like these ancient cultures, that's where it's just so non-American to do this, right? We grew up in a culture, generations of just buying it off the shelf and cooking it. Like this is just how we've been living for so long, but we have a serious eating problem. We have a serious dietary related disease problem. We've got to look at what we did. Like what the hell did we do to get here? And that's a big part of it. It's a huge part of it. The processed food, the not cooking foods the right way. Like there's a lot of things that we can change to turn it around. We're not past the point of turning this around. We can turn this around. We don't have to go out. We don't have to let our food be to our demise, because that's the path that we're headed right now. And this is just one step in that direction to help turn that around.
I totally agree. And I really love that. I kind of just want to start closing this out and ask you the same two questions I ask everybody, which is what's a take-home message you can give to our listeners? If there's one piece of advice you're saying after listening to this whole episode, this is what you should know, what can you give to us?
So you've got to make, at the end of the day, sprouting this and, amino acids, and like, it could be overwhelming, right? This has to be enjoyable. Like, if you're not enjoying the food that's on your plate, you physically will not absorb those nutrients, right? That's science. If you're in a stressed out spot when you're eating, if you're not enjoying that food, you literally won't absorb the nutrients. So you've got to make this food delicious. And if that means having a shift in culture, having a shift in the mindset around what is celebratory at that celebratory meal, whether it's a birthday or Christmas, introducing new foods that are part of that culture that you live in, that's so embedded in literally in your DNA, that's what it becomes about. You've got to enjoy the food that's going to love you back. You really embrace it for the nutrients. It's going to take a while to have that shift, but it's got to be enjoyable. You've got to love that food on the plate. It can't just be like, I'm wolfing this down because it's good for me, and I'm soaking that rice because it's, you've got to learn to embrace it. That's a big part of it too.
I love that. You got to enjoy the foods you're eating. That's end of the day. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
I love that. And the last question, Alan, probably the easiest one for you to answer, is where can people get a hold of you? Where can they find you? And just talk a little bit more about what your company and what you guys are doing.
Yeah. So my website is allencampbell.com. That's where you can find my meal delivery service. I've got some recipes there. I do chef placement. I do some other consulting services. And then my Instagram is Chef Allen Campbell. I'll post, I'll do some recipes there, some videos, some cooking videos, stuff like that. And AC Kitchen is my meal service, small batch, organic. We adopted all of these philosophies I talked about in my business, which makes us pretty unique. We also follow different dietary protocols. We customize our menus according to the dietary needs of our clients, which keeps us small batch. It's not something that's going to be for everyone. But we go from Boston to Manhattan Sundays and Wednesdays.
I love it, guys. And the website is allencampbell.com. Highly recommend you check this guy out, because just talking to you now, I've learned so much information that I don't even know when I'm in the field. So I really, really appreciate you coming on today. It means the world to all of us. And thank you guys for joining us on this week's episode of Health and Fitness Redefined. Don't forget, subscribe to our show and join us next week as we dive deeper into this ever-changing field. And remember, fitness is a journey, not a destination. Thanks for coming on, Alan. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Anthony. Great to be here.